All right, here we are with another episode of the High Ground, powered by Premier Companies. Sal, how am I doing today?
You're doing better on the second take.
Thanks. Thank you. I'm doing fine today. I hope you're doing well, too.
I am.
All right, sounds good. Well, we have two guests today. We have two guests for a special episode that we're doing, and I feel like Premier has been blessed with experts in different facets of all the businesses that we are in, grain, agronomy, fuel. And they were all busy, so we have these two.
I mean, I don't know.
Well deserved.
I thought so too,
Yeah,
Glenn.
it was well
I thought if
deserved.
anybody deserves
This
that,
is why
it'd be
people
you.
watch this show, because
Right?
they never know what's going to come.
In all seriousness, though, these are our two most popular guests. I mean,
They
these
are.
have been the most spotlighted on this podcast. So,
And they never met until today.
Yeah.
is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, so in studio, first time together. All right, very good. Well, this we're gonna get into what this podcast is about, but first we're gonna go ahead and do our question of the day and get it out of the way. So, Glenn Longabaugh, Aaron Bledsoe, welcome to the podcast room once again for both of you. And your
morning.
question of the day today is, Aaron, we'll start with you. Favorite TV show growing up?
So what's growing up, though? I mean, is it like real little or just any time? I mean, we got Bugs Bunny. We got
Yeah, Looney Tunes, man.
context, as Glenn would say.
Yeah, context.
Any of them? All
Yeah.
right.
Well, it's just whatever you growing up. I mean,
I'm still growing up.
Okay.
You know, sometimes wider than I am taller anymore, but Looney Tunes, or if I had to narrow it, I mean, this other show is not a Looney Tunes show, but the Angry Beavers. No,
What?
probably.
Nope.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
nope, I had no
The
idea.
Angry
Never
Beavers.
heard of that one.
Angry Beavers.
All right.
Daggett and Norbert. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It was Nickelodeon. Oh yeah.
We have to give all of our listeners
my
time
gosh.
to Google this.
There was an episode where the beavers learned that they could musk stuff. Oh, it was priceless. I mean, priceless. You have
The
to look it
Angry
up.
Beavers.
The Angry Beavers. The
What
Angry
year
Beavers.
was this?
Oh, it had been, I don't know, mid late 90s probably. Oh my gosh, it's a
I've
jewel,
never
dude.
heard of that.
You
It's a
have to look
cartoon?
it up. Yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They got like a penthouse dam that they live in. Oh, it's pretty sweet.
Netflix is going to see a spike on Angry Beavers for some reason.
Well, if anybody can figure out where to stream it, let me know.
I'm out. I don't want to do this anymore.
Excuse me.
Shoot.
I need a replacement.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm not sure I can follow that. The Angry Beavers with the penthouse lodge. That's kind of hard to follow. But no, I was a Looney Tunes buff. I kind of was a snob towards Bullwinkle and Natasha and
Oh yeah. There you go.
Savoir Faire is everywhere.
That's awesome.
As far as sitcoms, I was thinking about it. There's two came to mind. One was the Beverly Hillbillies. I loved the Beverly Hillbillies, and the other one was Sanford and Son. Man,
Sanford's son.
I often catch myself staggering around,
Either-
clutching my chest, going, "I'm having the big one, Elizabeth."
I'm coming to see you.
Shoot.
They can't make TV like that anymore.
They
Those
can't.
are the best.
Yeah, that'd be like All in the Family. And Sanford and Son, those are pretty politically incorrect. But actually, the one that I remember, that you made time for, there was one program, and you never hear about it anymore. But I mean, even into college, my roommate and I would go steal. We wouldn't steal. We'd go borrow our.
Wow. Okay.
Well, what we would do is we'd go borrow the neighbor's telephone book at Purdue, right, in the dorm. We'd borrow their telephone book. And in the back, there were these coupons, right? Well, one of them was for Godfather's Pizza. And being on a college budget, this is our big splurge of the week. We'd steal a coupon out of the back of their telephone book. I'd drive over to Lafayette, which is where the Godfather's Pizza was. And it was like a 2-topping pizza and 64 ounces. It was in these cups. They looked like a cup on the bottom and a milk container on top. You guys remember those? Looked like it was these crazy 32-ounce drinks. Anyway, you could get a 2-topping pizza and these 64 ounces of drink, and that time was like $6.50. And I'd drive over to Lafayette, come back, and we'd watch every Sunday night that we were at school. We'd watch Marty Stauffer's Wild America.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Man,
Yeah.
I loved that program, man. I mean, that was a Sunday ritual if you were stuck at school over the weekend, man, with Marty Stauffer's Wild America.
Well, I think it's probably worth mentioning that with these two in the room, there are deer that are breathing safely
Yes.
right now. There are
Yeah.
deer out there that are absolutely calm right at the moment with
Yeah.
these two here.
Yeah. Work really gets in the way of my hunting. I mean, it's bad. It's bad.
Yeah, that's great. Sal, what was your favorite TV
I
show?
think as a little kid, I mean, obviously it was the Saturday morning cartoons, right? You only had 3 channels, and I liked the wrestling. It was a Saturday morning. We'd have wrestling with all the classics and handsome Jimmy Valiant and Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee and all those names that you don't hear anymore.
Nice.
But, those were good. And then would watch my grandparents. It came on at the same time as Gunsmoke, so this was a battle. If I was at my grandparents, and I wanted to watch the Incredible Hulk with Lou Ferrigno, and at the same time as Gunsmoke. And sometimes they'd watch a little Incredible Hulk, and it would just drive my grandma crazy. Oh, that big green monster! Why are you watching him? I don't know why.
He's a pretty nice guy until you make him mad.
This is starting to. This is this picture is starting to come together of you, Sal. My son.
What makes him tick?
My son would watch this movie as a kid. It was called Nacho Libre. It's Jack Black.
Oh,
yeah. Gosh. Yeah.
And the whole time I'm sitting there grinning and laughing, I'm thinking about, grown men sometimes in the privacy of their own room wear a stretchy pants.
Grown
And
man.
it's so stupid. And yet, if you watch 2 minutes of it, you're kind of hooked.
Wow. Okay, so we're trashing this one. So we're done.
Yeah, there's no sense in putting
Who
this.
would, yeah.
We can't put this
Is there
out
anybody
there.
else in the building that we can interview? So mine have to be Dukes of Hazzard. I lived for that on Friday night, which I believe the Incredible Hulk was on right before that. I
Yep.
think it was the Incredible Hulk and then Dukes of Hazzard right after that. So that was made for good Friday night fun. And and we lived at that point in time in an old farmhouse, which there wasn't any place to get away from it. So you had to watch it. I was pretty spoiled. I was the youngest of 5 and the only one still basically at home at that point in time. So I still got to watch that. But yeah, Dukes of Hazzard and the Incredible Hulk were both fun. I didn't like the Incredible Hulk as much as I did the Dukes. But
Yeah, Dukes are good.
if I still had all of the General Lees that I had at that point in time, I could probably sell them for a substantial amount of money. But all those old vintage things are gone because I jumped them.
Well, that's surprising.
I like to jump them.
Yeah, Ryan, you really surprised me there because you basically just alluded that it was around the car, and I just knew it was about Daisy.
No, it was the car. I was 5. The car was pretty cool. I didn't even know. Didn't even know Daisy was on it. She had a cool car at that point in time. So.
She's got a whole outfit that's just named after her. You know, the Daisy Dukes.
Yep.
The shorts.
I don't know what you're talking
Never
about.
mind.
I think we're gonna have to throw a BS flag.
All right. Well, back to this podcast. So
Angry
Okay.
beavers.
What? I said Looney Tunes too. I mean, you can't get look. Looney Tunes is so good that I did a speech in college about Looney Tunes. I toasted the original Wile E. Coyote because he was the original Iron Man. Nobody could beat him. I mean, the dude took Acme rockets to the face and kept chucking. Did he fail every single day? He did, but he had a lifetime.
But he kept trying.
Perseverance
What an
was
epic.
his quality. I mean, that dude just kept chucking it. I mean, gotta love him.
Well, now that we've absolutely eliminated any credibility we had,
Pretty much. Pretty much.
Glenn's quietly nodding. So, all right, what this episode is about is this stems from a conversation I had with my wife on one of the podcasts where we discussed topsoil. And she asked me what topsoil was. And she said, part of your intent for this podcast was to talk to your non-farming neighbors about agricultural topics. She said, in doing so, you're probably going to need to explain some of the terms that you use, slow down, and talk about the terms. So that's why you guys are here. I dubbed this one agricultural code talkers. So occasionally we do get caught up in, I know what I'm talking about and you know what I'm talking about. So we're pretty comfortable with our terms. We have a grain guy, we have an agronomy guy. We're going to hit these terms a little bit, and you guys are going to give us the definition of them. So, and if you think of others that I don't hit on that you think are important that we sometimes would just have in casual conversation that might throw somebody off, we'll throw those in as we go. All right, so one of the terms that we're going to talk about that addresses both of your lives and both of your businesses is the term resistance. So I know that you both encounter that in different ways. So Glenn, why don't you tell us what resistance means in your world?
Yeah. So in agronomy, when I think of resistance, I think of disease resistance. I think of insect resistance. I think of potentially herbicide resistance, right? And some of those resistance traits are built in, and some of those are maybe transgenic, or they have been added to a particular plant, or they have been maybe just selected for their resistance to a particular pest or an insect or to a herbicide, right?
Okay. What's resistance in your world?
So you'll hear a lot of people talk about traders and specs and all that when they use the word resistance, and they're talking about charts and things of that nature. And so what resistance means in the grain world, in that lingo, when you're talking about traders, is that the price is hitting a wall that it's having a hard time breaking through. There is resistance there, and the backside, you got to remember that this Chicago Board of Trade, there's individuals. There's somebody in the background saying, I will buy corn at this, or I won't buy corn at this. So when there's resistance, it just means that there's opposition to wanting to go any higher or any lower in this market.
Okay.
So
I'll stick with Aaron here. What is hedging and hedges? What is so?
So hedging in what we do for the grain elevator would be, we're using the futures to eliminate some of the price risk that we have. So hedging is, we have the physical commodity when we buy it, whether it be beans, corn, wheat, whatever it is from the farmer. We hedge, or we sell or buy a futures contract that is openly traded on the Chicago Board of Trade. So all we are doing is trying to hedge our risk or eliminate some of the price risk that we have. So hedging is just the utilization of the futures market.
Okay.
all right, Glenn, the one that started it all, what's topsoil?
Yeah. So topsoil to me is I don't really know what the dictionary meaning would be, but we use topsoil as kind of a catch-all term. It's typically the upper part of the soil profile, and topsoil is important because it's the part that really contains most of the life in the soil, right? So soil isn't just, a lot of people think that soil is just mineralogy, and it's really not, right? If you think about the soil by volume, it's only about half solids, right? And then there's generally about 25% that's air, and there's 25% at field capacity that's water. And of that solids, that 50% of the soil that's solids, there is some portion of that that's organics. But plants live in a pretty narrow band. You think about the surface of the earth and what a narrow band all this life lives in. That topsoil is the interface, right? So in this part of the world, our soil, because we are loess soils, right? In other words, after the last time we were glaciated, we have had not inches, but feet of soil deposited by wind, right? And then it revegetated itself, right? And these plants have seceded and covered most of the surface in this part of the world, right? And you go over here to I drove through the state forest on the way here this morning. That is, there's a lot of residuum over there. In other words, it's never been glaciated, and there's a tiny little bit of soil that the plants have basically eked out of what was rock. And yet here we have, multiple feet of soil, but it's that uppermost foot that probably contains the vast majority of life, and that's what the plants make a living on, right? Almost all the mineralogy that supports a plant comes out of that uppermost, could be 6 inches, could be, 2 feet, but It's that surface of the soil, right? That shallow portion near the surface is really, really important to life.
I've got a follow up for Glenn. So, how did the glaciers? You always, it seems like you bring a glacier into all this when we talk about soil.
Come in waving your glacier.
Yep.
Yep. Sorry.
So, how did the glaciers? What tell us about the glacier and the impact it had, and because you always do kind of explain this when you're talking to growers or when you talk to some of the account reps. So, what did they have the impact?
Yeah. So, I think the reason why we start with glaciers a lot of times is because that had such a huge impact on the topography and the type of soil we have here, right? So there are glaciers that happened, 250 million years ago, like the pre-Illinoisan glacier, however long it was, right? Obviously, I don't know that we do that great a job of carbon dating but roughly it was a long, long time ago. But the reason why glaciers often come up is the last group of glaciers we had here was the Wisconsin Glacier. And the Wisconsin Glacier is what dipped out Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. And there's a couple different arms of it that came down across Indiana. And it receded, right? And we're talking miles deep pieces of ice that were moving, real slowly across the landscape, basically grinding up, this whatever was in its path and leaving behind what's called glacial till. Now, we don't farm here a lot of glacial till. What we farm is the loess that blew in here after the glaciers receded. And by the way, these glaciers, the Wisconsin Glacier only receded about 10,000 years ago. So when we talk about climate change, 10,000 years geologically is a blip in time, right? I mean, it's a snap of your fingers. And in reality, we've only been revegetated, right? So once the ice receded, it took some time, and that's why we have all this loess, right? That's why we have all this wind-blown, wind-deposited soil, is because you had all this huge area that was windswept with no vegetation to hold on to it. So we had, saltation and, basically wind erosion, picking that soil up, moving it to other places and depositing it, right? And so it's had a huge impact on our soils, right? Where I live, we have deep, lush soils just like you have here. Some places it's sandy. As you come west, then you get into places that weren't glaciated, and there might be a small amount of loess on top of, just limestone rock, heavily eroded. But that's the reason why I start with glaciers a lot of times, is because it's had just a huge impact on Indiana. You look at most of Indiana, most of Illinois, they were highly impacted by glaciers, and the northern part of our state and the central part of the state are relatively flat. They were leveled off, and then this material was moved around by wind and deposited, and it revegetated about 5,000 years ago. So most of the, that's the other cool thing. If it revegetated with grass, then the soils are typically really deep, and there's a lot of organic material down deep in the ground, right? If it was revegetated by forests, believe it or not, it typically has really low organic matter, right? You're saying, well, how is that possible, right? The woods are full of organic material. Well, the woods carries most of the organic material above ground, right? Very little organic material below ground. It's almost all above ground. Where in a prairie ecosystem where you have grass, man, it's constantly recycling and moving those nutrients and that organic material down deeper into the soil.
Fascinating.
Okay. Aaron, everybody has options. You talk about options in a little different manner. So what does options mean in your world?
Options, they are a way for people to stay in the market. It's a way for them to sell the grain and still participate in the market in whichever direction it is going. So they have the option, but they don't have the obligation, is, I think, the easiest way to say it.
Okay.
It's an option. It's another option for options is all it is.
Okay. All right.
I'm going to stick with Aaron. Basis. You use basis constantly whenever you're talking. What is a basis?
So the purely simple definition of basis is the difference in the cash price versus the futures market. So that could either be positive or negative. Whatever it is that, like for instance, right now we're using the December 2023 corn futures to price our corn. In this market right now, that's what we're using. So if I'm paying over the December futures price, I have a over basis or I have a strong basis. If I'm paying under that, then I have a negative basis. That's all it is. The function of the basis is to determine how bad you want something and to move the grain where it needs to go. So, you go into the corn belt, we typically in fall harvest, I say typically, you'll see a negative basis number. You go out west where they've had some heat problems, or let's use the southeast, the big chicken turkey market down there, the poultry market, where they do not grow enough corn to feed their system, they will have a positive basis or over the futures board. So, and what that is doing is it's trying to move the corn from where it is to where it's not. So it's one big puzzle of trying to move the grain from where it is to where it's not, just to feed the system.
Paying more for it somewhere else.
Yep.
So we'll give you more if you get it here.
Exactly.
All right.
Basis will either slow demand down or it will create demand.
So thank you.
All right, Glenn, we talk about nutrients all the time. Macro, micro, and trace nutrients. What differentiates them, and name a few of them for us?
Yeah. So, when we think about macronutrients, we normally start with N, P, and K, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Of the things we amend, those are probably the most common, but the true macronutrients are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, right? Those are not the ones we pay for, but that's the primary role of a plant, is to capture CO2 out of the atmosphere and fix that using the power of sunlight back into an energy source, right? Back into a sugar. And primarily it's glucose, which is a 6-carbon chain organic compound, right? That animals are capable of utilizing for energy. So N, P, and K of the things we amend in the soil, nitrogen, in order of their volume, it would be nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and then in secondaries, right? The secondary macronutrients would be sulfur, magnesium, and calcium, right? And then we have these tertiary nutrients or micronutrients or trace elements, right? And that would be things like boron, zinc, manganese, iron, copper, molybdenum, nickel, chloride. I'm trying to think if there's any I've missed. But yeah, there's lots of those micronutrients that are taken up, maybe thinking about volume and then I'll.
So let's put it this way. At a 200 bushel corn, which is common in our area, 200 bushel corn, how many pounds of nitrogen would that plant need?
Yeah. So what it actually will there's been a lot of PhDs
Yeah, I was going to say,
off of how much.
Ask a hard question.
Yeah. So
Who you gonna ask?
So if you wanted to put a hard number on it, 200 bushel corn probably the minimum you get by with is probably 0.9 pounds or 180 pounds of nitrogen.
Okay.
But let's think about it this way, right? When you think of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, those on 200 bushel corn are taken up in thousands of pounds per acre. You think about the primary macros like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, those are typically taken up in hundreds of pounds per acre. Secondary nutrients, the secondary macros, which would be like calcium, magnesium, and sulfur, the soil is totally, completely rich with calcium here. And yet, because that's what the parent material came from, was calcite. But in reality, plants only take up, tens of pounds, right? So hundreds of pounds for N, P, and K, tens of pounds for secondaries like calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. And then the micronutrients or tertiary nutrients are taken up in fractions of pounds, right? You might take up a pound of boron, you might take up a half a pound of zinc or something, but for the most part, it's fractions of pounds is all. There's a difference too between uptake and removal, but very small amounts are removed with grain.
Cool. All right. Very good.
Got a good question for Aaron then. What in the world is a bushel? We always talk about bushels, and we never say what that means, but we're always talking these bushels. And what is a bushel?
I think that was the American saying, we're going to have a different measuring system than everybody else.
Than everybody else.
No, a bushel is a measurement of weight. So for beans, it's 60 pounds. 60 pounds of beans equals a bushel. For corn, it's 56 pounds. It's just a unit of measure, but when you start talking globally, it's all about tons. It's not bushels, it's tons. So
we're the only place in the world, just like our measurement system, where we talk.
well, I don't know if I'd say the only place in the world, but yeah, we live on bushels. Most of the export markets live on metric tons. So.
Okay, thank you.
Which we should give a shout out to the last Saturday Night Live episode with Nate Bargatze when he does George Washington and how the United States come up with their measurements. So yeah, I think you should watch it. It's very good. I'd recommend it to anyone. So, all right, Glenn.
Yes, sir.
What is CRP ground? We talk about CRP ground. What is that?
Yeah, so Conservation Reserve, it's a government program called the Conservation Reserve Program, and basically it was a way to take some of these marginal acres out of production and keep them in reserve, if you will, for times when maybe we need more production, right? So when I got out of college in 1985, always try to add some color, some history here. When I got out of college in 1985, agriculture was in disrepair, right? We had gone into an embargo, very similar politically to where we're at right now, right? There was really high interest rates. We had overproduced. We had screwed up our markets around the world, and it was tough times. And there was a lot of folks, when you got $1.50 corn and big production costs, there was a lot of folks that were more than willing to put their land over in these programs, even for, as much as 15 or 20 years because they couldn't make it pay, right? And so that's what normally goes in it are these, acres that are pretty marginal. But interestingly enough, I've got a farm that I bought a few years ago that was in 2 terms of CRP. And until I raised corn on it, the neighbor, an elderly gentleman, told me that he had never seen corn in there, and he had lived across from that farm for over 50 years. And that farm has had a couple corn crops on it, and both corn crops
Probably good, huh?
were way over 200 bushel, right?
Good.
And lots and lots of topography. So you could make the case that it really is, conserving a soil resource for some later date down the road.
In ancient times and biblical times, they would let the ground rest every 7 years, right?
They did.
Yep.
Yep.
I've got another one for Aaron. Puts and calls.
Puts and calls are just options. They serve different purposes. Puts are usually, done when you think the market could be going down. Calls are a way to stay in the market if you think it's going to rally or continue going up. So again, options are a way for someone to participate in the market, regardless if they like the cash price or the contracted price of their grain or grain. It's just another way for them to stay in the market and feel like they are participating in rallies or declines in the market.
I'm coming back to you, Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been to your facility and multiple facilities that handle grain, and you got to climb stairs or ladders to everything you do. Why are they called elevators?
I have no idea.
That's funny.
I have no idea. You would have thought as a grain guy, I would have Googled why is it called an elevator? The only thing I can think of, and I was thinking about this long and hard, 10 minutes on the way over here, was
We had an hour and a half.
Yeah, podcast. But it takes the grain from ground level and it elevates it up and then drops it down. So, and instead of it calling it a leg facility or a grain lifter facility, it was a grain elevator. It elevates it. I don't know.
I think you're right.
I could be poetic and be like, well, I help elevate the status of the grain. I hold it and then I elevate the quality until later. But
Not after your answer on the question of the day, you don't.
No.
You don't elevate the status of anything.
Yeah.
De-elevate.
I hate to be the nerd in the room, but I think they're called elevators because if you elevate the grain, then it has potential energy and it's easier to move, right? Because you can use gravity to move it from that point on.
That's what I was going to say.
An object in motion. Yeah.
Another one for
There you
Glenn.
go. Yeah.
One.
I got to get some back. Man.
There you go.
You were on a
Yeah,
roll
you
this
really
morning.
slid. You really slid on that episode.
Yeah.
All right, Sal.
Traits. We just say traits. We say traded we say with this trade or that trade, or it's traded crop, traded corn. What does that mean, Glenn?
Yeah, that's really a good it's a good question. So when we talk about traits, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's transgenic. It doesn't mean that it's absolutely genetically modified. But some of the most successful stories we have around traits are genetically modified organisms. So when we say a trait, right, if it has an insect trait, that was one of the first, right, was BT corn. And BT corn is where they basically isolated a protein out of Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a natural soil-borne organism that produces a protein that makes some insects sick at their stomach, right? And the order is called Lepidopteran, right? So Lepidopteran means scaly wings. It's the order of moths and butterflies. The larvae of Lepidopteran are particularly damaging to row crops, right? Especially corn, right? So we had European corn borer, we have corn earworm, we have black cutworm, we have this plethora of lepidopteran insects that infect corn. The first transgenic trait that I remember was BT corn, and it was pretty successful because it effectively made it to where you could control European corn borer. But they didn't take the bacteria and put into corn. They basically took the trait that exists in this bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis, put that into corn so that corn would then exhibit this trait or produce this particular protein that makes this one order of insects sick at their stomach. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And then later, we came up with a non-transgenic trait called imizethapyr tolerance, which allowed us to use lightning or earlier on it was called scepter pursuit. Actually, not scepter, it was pursuit, right? It allowed you to use imizethapyr or these IMI chemistries on corn, which would normally kill corn, but they naturally bred corn to resist that, right? It is non-transgenic. And then, of course, we ended up with Roundup Ready corn. And, it's really a success story because we have lots of traits in the market as well as above and below ground insect protection, lots of herbicides. We have probably 4 different herbicide tolerance traits in the market. None of those have been found to be even allergenic toward, to people, right? So
Yeah.
very, very safe, very, very effective. It's made conservation tillage, right, possible. I've heard people say, "Oh, that darn Roundup trade, they're killing the environment." Well, if it wasn't for Roundup Ready corn and Roundup Ready soybeans and being able to kill off weeds without hurting the crop, we would not have a conservation tillage movement. If we didn't have a conservation tillage movement, our rivers, instead of going over the White River this morning and seeing this nice, kind of bright green color, that thing would be mud brown year round. Right?
Yeah.
So,
We don't think about it in those terms, especially, I remember when I first started in the industry, we sold semi-loads of insecticides.
Absolutely.
I mean, semi-loads and truckloads, and that's all gone.
absolutely.
It is all gone because of the traded corn. Good.
Okay, great. All right, Aaron. People will hear you say in your podcast to being long and short the market. What does that mean?
So, long the market from like what I'll say is from a customer, from a farmer standpoint, long the market is that you've got corn or beans and you're sitting on it. You have something that the market wants and you're just sitting there. You're long something. You are long grain. You have it. You have it in your possession. Short would be you don't have it. You've sold more than what you have. And eventually you're going to have to find it to cover your sales. Long and short.
Okay.
So,
very good.
from a basis position, that's just saying that if I'm long if my position is short, then I've overhedged myself. If I'm long, I've I've oversold the market for short. I've overbought for long.
Okay. All right. You any more?
I think I only got about one more, and that is, I think you kind of hit on it, conservation tillage. So I think when people think of farming, they think of plow and going out and disking and plowing, and tell us about what does no-till mean, and what does reduced till and conventional till. What is it? What is those buzzwords about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. and I'd like to be as brief as my my
He's not used one word that has 38 letters in it yet. You've done that like 12 times.
Sorry.
I just wanted to
It's
throw
just-
that out there.
Let's just go back to the fact that I said angry beavers.
Yeah.
And the episode where they musked each
You
other.
set,
So
you set the
That
bar low. I
explains
get
a
it.
lot.
You set the bar low when we
Yeah.
started. So
Like-
go ahead, Glenn.
we have clearly figured out who the expert out of the two is.
No, I don't know about that.
Right, a minute
So-
ago he said I didn't want to be the nerd, but
Well-
he couldn't help it.
I was trying to decide whether to go back to.
The potential energy, the elevator.
Yeah, I don't want to, but I can't help it.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to go back to Europe or ancient agriculture, but even in this country, if you think about, John Deere is a really popular brand in this country, right? And I think whether we're talking about John Deere or McCormick Deering, they didn't start out with tractors. They started out with implements, right? And one of them was a mow-board plow. And mow-board plows allowed you to turn soil over. And the reason why we wanted to turn soil over was to bury organic material, right? Which then became like green manure. It became a source of fertility. But it was also around weed control, right? And today, because we can use chemicals instead of just physically, there's chemical control and there's cultural control. And historically, what they had before chemical control was only cultural control, which means you either hoed it out or you plowed it, cultivated it. You were constantly disturbing the soil. And that's not really good for the soil, and it's certainly not good for erosion, right? So the real value of conservation tillage or no-till is reducing the amount of disturbance we do, because the more we disturb the soil, the more we disturb the structure. And structure is that affinity that the soil has for itself, right? That aggregation. The more aggregated and the more structured we can have to keep the soil, the less erosion we have. So we have less sediment in our rivers, with the less, because the soil doesn't just leave the field by itself with the water. It takes nutrition, it takes minerals with it, and some of those are pollutants, right? Like phosphorus is really bad. So no-till is where we use only chemical control. We don't physically disturb the soil at all. When we talk about minimum tillage, that's maybe we do occasional tillage, but we do light tillage, right? We're not taking rippers or we're not taking mow boards and disturbing the soil really deep. We're only maybe disturbing the surface, trying to cover up some residue or just very minimal disturbance. And then, of course, we have conventional tillage, which is today, there's a lot of, because it's dry, the soil, you'll see a lot of conventional tillage out there. That's where you take like a ripper and go through the soil. But you'll notice that most farms, even if they're conventional tillers, they're pretty respectful, right?
Yeah.
The ag community has become very aware of erosion. And when you see rippers out there, it's probably pretty level, flat ground that doesn't have a lot of erosion problems. And they'll rip it and try to leave as much residue on the surface to help protect that soil from not only water erosion, but wind erosion. And then next spring, they'll maybe run a vertical tillage tool or some field cultivator, some secondary tillage tool to level it up and make a nice seed bed for the planter.
Okay.
Okay, last one for you, Aaron. Cost to carry.
Cost to carry is a reference to basically interest. So cost to carry for the elevator would be if I buy farmer A 5,000 bushels from him. Well, I pay the farmer A for 5,000 bushels. Well, I got that money from the bank. And so there's an interest on that per dollar that I paid per bushel that that the elevator has to cover in some form or fashion, or at least keep in mind that, it's the same way as the farmer goes, okay, well, I can produce that bushel for $4.50 per bushel, $4.50. That is my per bushel cost. But I've got all these expenses on it. So that $4.50 may actually be, well, I need to sell it in 2 months at, $4.75 because I've got operating loans that have increased that cost. So that cost to carry is that. It's real. All it is it's the cost of money. It is the cost of doing business. So,
Okay.
All right.
All right. Well, we'll have a lot more of these, and we'll have you guys back to do more of these because I know that it just happens so quickly. We just slide these terminologies in, and nobody knows what we're talking about sometimes. So it was a good reminder to slow down and do some explaining on what we do for a living. That's why we're here, and that's what we're trying to do. So, Sal, you got anything else for this group?
I don't.
I do not. So, guys, thank you so much. We'll have you back together. I'm glad you finally were in studio together, and you definitely are probably the two most viewed guests we have.
Yep.
So, thank you so much for your time, not just today, but always. And that's another episode of the High Ground, powered by Premier Companies. Please
Thank you.
like and subscribe.